Welcome everyone. Hi, thanks for joining us, and especially thanks to our special guests from Australia. Thanks for taking the time out of your day, out of your early morning for you, and the late evening for some of us, and everywhere else in between. Um, I won't take long here just so that we can maximize the time for discussion. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. First of all, for Zoom etiquette, we'll use the raise hands feature so that we can make sure everyone gets called on. Um, uh, if you can, please, it's useful to mute yourself while you're not speaking, just so that our furry friends and extras in our rooms don't interfere too much with our discussion. And if you can, keep your camera on for the discussion, as it helps promote a sense of openness here. So we'll be recording this meeting so that those who are on the committee who aren't on the call will be able to listen in and watch what's shared today later on. I also just want to say that at the academies, we're committed to fostering a professional, respectful, and inclusive environment where all participants can participate fully in an atmosphere free of harassment and discrimination. So this is just to say, let's be respectful of one another. And if there's anything that makes you feel uncomfortable today, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or any of the National Academy staff on the line here. And finally, thanks to the other National Academy staff on the line for helping to plan this meeting, especially Morgan, who really set up all of the logistics, and Noel and Brian as well. And with that, I will hand it over to our committee co-chairs, Rod and Carol, to lead us through the discussion today.
Well, Carol and I always look at each other at this point and wonder who's going to take the lead. I guess let me just briefly introduce myself and welcome you. I'm Rod Eggert, longtime faculty member at the Colorado School of Mines. We are delighted to have this opportunity to meet with all of you from Geoscience Australia to learn about your activities and your view of the challenges that you face, because this input will help inform our assessment to the U.S. Geological Survey and its mineral resources program. So thank you very much.
Yes, and I'll add my thanks. I'm Carol Frost, and I'm a professor of geology at the University of Wyoming. And to echo Rod, all of us on this call are members of a committee assembled by the National Academies to give impartial and independent advice to the USGS on how they might stand up their mineral resources program science portfolio to meet not just today's needs, but the future. And for us, it just made very good sense to talk to people like you who are doing the same kinds of things in different countries where things may be done a little differently, and there may be some great inspiration that we can draw from you. What I'd suggest we do is we'll introduce ourselves as the committee, and then it'd be wonderful to have each of you, Marina, Michael, and Allison, just say a few words, from your perspective about mineral resources in your system, in your federal system. And you can keep those pretty brief because we are happy to pelt you with questions. So with that, maybe I can call on the committee to introduce themselves in the direction that they are in my Zoom boxes, which means it will be Cecilia, Robert, and then Nelia.
Hi, my name is Cecilia Laszlo-Skold. I am an environmental geochemist by training. I used to work at Rio Tinto in Perth, Australia, but currently I live in Arizona and I work for Regeneration, a company that remines mine tailings. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Bob Bodner. I'm a faculty member at Virginia Tech. I'm a geochemist, petrologist, and I work on a variety of topics, including ore deposits. And thank you for joining us today.
Hi, my name is Nelia Dunbar. I am a geochemist, petrologist, volcanologist by training, and I'm the Emeritus State Geologist of New Mexico.
All right, and then we'll do Steve and Stephanie and Richard.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm not sure whether it's good evening or good morning where you are, but it's good afternoon here in Alaska. Steve Masterman, yeah, I'm by training and by experience an economic geologist, a lot of time in the gold industry. And then subsequently, I was Alaska State Geologist, and like Neely, I'm now an emeritus state geologist, and I'm currently working for the University of Alaska Fairbanks in the Alaska Critical Minerals Collaborative.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephanie Grokey. I'm a geologist. I run a consultancy for mineral exploration. We have offices here in Reno, where I'm based, as well as Australia and the Philippines.
Good evening. I'm Richard Smith. I'm an exploration geophysicist, and I work at Laurentian University in Sudbury. And full disclosure, I used to work for a company called Geoterix that Marina worked for many years ago.
Interesting. Okay, then we have Rachel and Karen and David.
Hi there, my name is Rachel Hampton. By training, I'm a volcanologist, petrologist, but now I work in lithium exploration specifically. I used to work for a company called Lithium Americas in the sedimentary space, but now work for a company called Cobalt Metals doing exploration all over the world, including in the US, working in the pegmatite, brine, sedimentary space, so all of the above. But I'm really excited to get to hear more about your work with the USGS and to get to ask some questions today. So thanks for being here.
Hi, my name is Karen Olson Hall. I'm at Cornell University. I teach economic geology, and I work in the field of geometallurgy largely. Next year, I'll actually be at the CSIRO in Perth doing a geomet for ESG project.
Hello, everyone. I'm David Yin. I'm a senior research scientist at Stanford Earth and Planetary Science, and also manages this Mineral X program at Stanford. I'm a geoscientist by training. My research area is to use machine learning and AI for Earth resources evaluation. And for my research and for my student research, I also use a lot of the data that are from the Geoscience Australia portal. Looking forward to learn more from in the collaboration that GA has with USGS and the feedbacks expert has. Thank you.
And Carol, I apologize. I wasn't in control of my Zoom boxes. So I'm not sure which of you would like to begin. Allison, perhaps? Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not very good with the mute button on Zoom. We usually use Microsoft Teams. I was actually pointing to Marina as our most senior on my going. Oh, Marina should start because she's our most senior person. But since I've got the floor, I'm Alison Britt, and obviously Geoscience Australia, general geology background. I'm the director for the team that looks after the same kind of work that your National Minerals Information Centre does, the national inventory, what resources we have, where they are, putting out the maps, putting out our annual reports on Australia's resources and reserves. So that's my team does that. And now we go to Marina, perhaps. She's having unmute problems as well with Zoom.
getting there, getting there. It's sorry, thanks. Hello, welcome. It's really great to be here today with everybody. Some of you I know really well. Richard, you had such a huge impact on my career, and I'll ever be grateful. But a lot of you are just famous vicariously. I've read your paper, I've seen you online, I've been to a conference. So it's a bit of a thrill today. My name's Marina Costello. I'm the branch head of the Mineral Systems branch at GA. We do everything minerals, but we also do quite a lot of, let's say, fundamental geology. A lot of that sits in my team. As Richard let the bird out of the can, I'm a geophysicist by training, and I have had an exciting career being able to work in exploration geophysics, mineral exploration, groundwater, critical infrastructure, data science, earthquake monitoring, and a whole bunch of other things. So today should be really exciting. Right now we're working on resourcing Australia's prosperity, which is such a huge privilege. Thanks. Maybe Carol.
Might go next. Okay, so my name's Karol Czarnota. I'm my current position is Principal Science Advisor for Minerals, Energy and Groundwater here, but by training, I'm, you could say, an observational geodynamicist. So the kind of link between geology, geophysics, and a little bit of geochemistry thrown in. Yeah, so really looking forward to the discussion today. Yeah. Is Michael? Yeah, Michael, over to you.
Yeah, so my name is Michael Sexton. By training, I'm an electronics engineer, but in practice, I'm a software developer. I've got a bit of history developing some of the data models and databases that Geoscience Australia uses for mineral resources. And that's about it. Thanks.
Okay, well, so we're going to start asking you questions. And I wonder if I could begin by asking you, what do you think you do better than the USGS that they might learn from?
Yeah, thanks for that one. I might start with something pretty easy. I think we are a little bit more efficient when we look at the USGS. So what do we admire about the USGS? You have such depth of talent. You've got so many people who are experts, world experts, and we don't have that many people. And yet our countries, our politics, our resources are, let's go similar enough. So I think that we have to be more efficient for one thing, just because we don't have the talent in the country, that we don't have the pipeline of talent, but we definitely can't employ, the numbers of people that you do. Is that fair for a start?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a difference. When I look at what the NMIC people do, the National Minerals Information Centre, with the global data, etc., and I look at the size of my team, it's such a big difference. It's like, I've got 10 in my team if I'm lucky doing this work for the nation, and that team's up to 140 or something like that. Now, they're not just covering the US, they're also covering the globe, so there is a big difference there. But I don't think, so when I think of the amount of work that my small team manages to get done, and then I compare it to 140 people, I'm just like, wow. So I think the optimum is probably somewhere in the middle. Yeah, that is a difference with efficiencies and what we're being asked to do. I'm very jealous of the resourcing that NMIC get, actually, because they can do more than just resource their own national studies. They can do that global study, plus probably lots of other stuff that we don't see in the public sphere.
Yeah, so I can second those comments. Just to give you an indication, it is an order of magnitude difference in terms of numbers, in terms of people working there. So Allison's provided some of that, but that's certainly the case in the more science minerals kind of region. I take it we're focused predominantly on minerals here today. I'd say that a key difference between us at the moment is the level of data coverages across the country. And in particular, consistent geophysical data coverages, and probably standardization of various geological lexicons. So things like understanding the formations across the whole country. We've got a thing called the Australian Stratigraphic Units Database, which underpins all that. And we're trying to map the geology down at depth, like so what lies underneath the cover. That's a frontier that we're particularly focused on. So I think rolling out those types of coverages and also thinking about how to, I suppose, provide derivatives from those coverages which are directly relevant to industry. So what I mean by that is that some coverages are better in the US. Examples of this would be things like US Array, your recent completion of the MT coverage. But what is the use of those types of data sets for predictive targeting, for example, at various different types of scales? So I think those kind of links, because maybe we're smaller across Australia, it's easier for us to link in with academia and so on in those types of between those types of programs. Those are some reflections. But one of the reasons why we've been able to have this type of focus is because a decade ago, we came up with a thing called the Uncover Initiative. I'm not sure if you're familiar about it. It started actually out of the our National Science Academy, and it was a roadmap for how to advance mineral exploration across Australia. And our key challenge was that since 1993, our share of global exploration expenditure for mineral exploration has been falling, and it fell from 23% in 1993 to 8% in 2015. And we asked industry why are you leaving? I said, well, pretty much the places where you can kick a rock on the surface of Australia, all those rocks have been explored. I mean, it's not entirely true that all of them have been. There's still opportunities, obviously. But the focus back then was on base metals and some precious metals, so less so on the critical minerals that are now the focus. But that brought together basically government, academia, and industry and came up with what needs to happen to unlock the undercover search space. And we don't think that that is a unique problem for Australia. It is certainly a challenge, but we've had a focus on this for the last 10 years with a very clear, I suppose, direction. And now our share of mineral exploration has recovered to about 20%. So, and I think that that is partly because of that kind of focus across the geoscience community, which has been directly aimed at how do we, I suppose, attract industry and help its development. So maybe it's more broad than just Geoscience Australia. It's it's a community across Australia. I would also say that a big difference recently between us has been that we've been much more focused in terms of what is resulting in industry activity. So tracking and monitoring, what is it out of the things that we provide that results that is actually being used and appropriated by the industry that we're trying to stimulate. And I think, and we've been able to, I suppose, demonstrate that track record, and from that have the various impacts. Not to say we're perfect at it, it's like it's a new kind of thing that we're trying to do. But I think that's there's a difference there. Maybe there's some. Maybe we have kind of like discussions around those various points. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that last one, Carl, because I was going to say that that's definitely something that we're doing better than a lot of places, not just the USGS, is tracking that impact of the work that we're doing to understand, what kind of, even what kind of economic activity it stimulates. Because if you can speak the language of economics, you can, it helps with explaining or getting our government masters to understand the value of the geoscience work that we do.
Could we follow that up just a little more and dig a little deeper into how do you track? What measures or indicators of impact do you collect or do you focus on?
Yeah, sure. So there's sorry, I'm kind of hogging. anybody else wants to just, butt me out. So we do it in a few different ways. So principally, we have a person who keeps an eye on the tenement map of Australia and looks at what are the announcements on the stock exchange. And when there is movement, they call the company and they say, oh, I see you've picked up a new exploration tenement in location X. I was wondering what led you to pick this up and what information are you using to explore in that area? And from that, we get direct information that it was, oh, I saw a release by Geoscience Australia of a new geochemical survey across the region, a new magnetic thing, or there was a new insight into the mineral systems, or what have you. So we do this on a monthly basis and get a report in terms of the various activities that are happening, and it's super useful to do it early because stories change through time, especially if you end up discovering a really big thing later on. So it's really useful to get in early and get that type of information because at that point people are happy to share, what it is, and I think it's quite open. We also go to conferences and especially industry-based conferences. A lot of Australia's sector is I'd say about 70 to 80% of discoveries in Australia are made by the junior sector. So they're the kind of like the engine room. And we go around the various investor kind of forums and we ask them, are you using our information? What type of information to get feedback that way? The third way that we collect this information also is to do, I suppose, historical studies of looking at the tier 1, tier 2 discoveries, so the big things, and looking at their discoveries and what led to our company going into that area. So normally a geological survey, we don't drill out the deposit. We don't provide normally the data sets that are used to target the actual discovery drill hole, but we provide the information to narrow the search space and go into a new area. And that is the information that normally isn't reported as part of normal standard economic studies of discovery. Like if you have a look at data sets like Richard Shoddy's and so on, it'll be saying what information led to the drilling of the actual drill hole as opposed to what got them into the broad region, because exploration is a scale reduction process fundamentally. So we've been doing that actually for Australia, and we're starting to do it globally, so we can kind of like understand what is leading to the various discoveries to inform what we do. Not to say that we're entirely guided by that. There are new frontier, new bits of science that we also focus on that we think are useful to do. So yeah, hopefully that provides. Am I missing others?
What about the report that we commissioned? The Deloitte stuff.
Yeah,
we did also another factor as well.
Sorry, so I just popped my hand up. I was going to say we do return on investment reports, and just a summary of what Coral said. But some of it can be found on the website that I've just popped in the chat. How we go about it and what it looks like, and download the reports. But yeah, I think that's another one. But all of that information really underpins that value piece. And as we record more, we realize that some things are less impactful than others, depending on who's asking us. But yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And I think you also need to challenge when you hear back from companies. So I'll give you a little snippet of that. A global major went into a frontier region, paid huge amounts of ground, and this person called them up and they said, no, we didn't use any pre-competitive geoscience, it's all us, and that's it. And they reported this back, and I went, well, hold on. I know what was available over this region. It was only these data sets. Please do go and check that they didn't use this. And then the reply came back, oh yeah, of course. Well, everybody uses that. Like, I mean, you can't do anything across Australia without using the magnetics and the geology and the, and the gravity. And it's so good that they're leveled and, it's all consistent and, all that kind of information. And you go, well, unless you tell us, we can't really mount a case for doing more of this type of thing. So yeah, I think, you need to be engaged. It's not something you can kind of like just park on the side. Yeah, so that's, yeah. There's probably a few other bits that I might, also. On this topic of yeah.
Sorry, just an aside. I think we've also trained industry to help us. If they like the work we're doing, we've asked them to make a public statement about it. So if in the stock exchange announcement or on their website, if the Geoscience Australia data or data that we use from state and territory geological surveys have led them to a discovery or prospect, they will now put it in the public domain. Whereas I guess before 2015 maybe we never knew, like it was all very secret, but now they see that relationship being important. They can't lie because a lot of those things are tested. They can't just make it up, but there's more of a public facing announcement. I think that's valuable.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that culture change more as you start to talk about the success stories that are linked to pre-competitive or government-related geoscience. Companies are willing to, I suppose, acknowledge those things. But Steve?
Yeah, thanks. I'd just like to explore this in a sort of a different direction. I think it's great what you're doing. It's really fascinating. And I wonder how much sort of pure research the GA does, and if you do some, how do you track or quantify or qualify the impact of that sort of pure science portion of your portfolio as opposed to the geophysical surveys, geochemical surveys, mapping work, which is probably a little bit more easy to quantify?
Yeah, so I suppose like others, we've got science reviews, a bit like what you're doing now, I suppose, and that looks at the very standard academic type metrics in terms of publications, impacts, and so on. But to be fair, we are less tied to that than the USGS in terms of its advancement approach. In terms of how much pure research do we do, I think comparatively, I would say we do slightly less than the USGS in terms of on a per person basis, but that isn't to say that we do none. A lot of our efforts in the minerals space have recently been focused on understanding mineral systems and increasing the predictive, I suppose, power understanding of various different data sets to look at it. So the mineral potential mapping that we're doing with the USGS through the Critical Minerals Mapping Initiative and other things that started here. And I suppose we're continually do research in terms of how to uplift the quality of the data sets that we collect, as well as the way that we analyze and process them.
All right, I think Doug Howitt is next with a raised hand.
Following a little bit on the discussion of the data that's publicly available versus that more proprietary data, you need to incorporate that company proprietary data into your analysis and understanding of systems. And so how do you basically reverse that back out and share the broader knowledge of mineral systems and the fidelity of what information is important and not without compromising the proprietary data?
I'm mindful that I'm hogging the floor, so if anybody else wants to yeah, okay, I'll keep going. So I suppose on this front, we don't do one-on-one things with companies. What we do is we work through things which are openly, I suppose, people can join some sort of consortia or collaborative research project in that. And as part of that, we have agreements that we will that the end of the research that we do is going to be confidential for a year, maybe two, and after that it goes out to the public. Sometimes that requires that the insight that we gain from the research is provided, as opposed to the data sets that we may have had access to from industry. That's how we normally, I suppose, differentiate it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just add to that a lot of company data. So companies have to report what they're doing to the state government that they're working in, and there'll be a sort of an embargo period on that information and data that they provide the state, but it eventually becomes public. And so I'd say the majority of the data that we use is not proprietary at all. So you know, we're using publicly accessible data for most of our work.
Yeah. Just to follow on that, Alison, that embargo period, is that a negotiated period, or is that prescribed?
So that's something that each state government has rules and regulations about.
Okay.
So that's a point of difference between the Australian system and the US system. So when you take a mineral tenement in Australia, the state government still owns that tenement for the life of it still owns the land. The Commonwealth owns the land, and so if you're working on that tenement, you may have mineral rights to it, but you're also required to report on the work that you've done and the findings you've made to the state government, and they will hold that in embargo so that you don't lose any commercial advantage, but eventually it all becomes public. And so then it's available to the next company that comes in when you give up that tenement because you didn't find what you were looking for. And so in that way, we build up our stores of knowledge over time, rather than, I understand in the US system, some states have it that whatever the mining company does stays proprietary to that company. They go off, the next company comes in, has to start from scratch because they have no access to the previous work.
Mm-hmm.
That's a point of difference that enables us here at GA to perhaps work more efficiently because of just the system that we're working in.
Michael, did you have a follow-up point on this particular topic?
It's related to it. It kind of relates to Carol's earlier point on collaborations through the Critical Minerals Mapping Initiative. Is I think one advantage we have is we're very agile in collaborating because we've got these relationships with the states that are pre-existing. So we collaborate with them quite ably and with other parts of government and with academia really quite well. And part of that arises from the legislative framework that the states have to collect data. But we're very good at doing interoperability work with the states, collating state data. So we've got a lot of power through those relationships where we leverage things that the states do that help us and vice versa. So that's one thing I think we have that's an advantage that Geoscience Australia has. Yep.
Yeah. Whether that's a small thing or a big, an advantage of being a small country compared to being a big country, I don't know.
Yeah, that's right.
Great, thank you, Michael. I think Nelia Dunbar is next.
Yeah, I had something that actually builds a little bit on what Michael just said. So it sounds like you're all doing a fantastic job understanding how industry is using your data. And I was really interested to hear that model. My question is, how responsive are you to industry needs? And I'm curious if you are, first off, and then as a follow-up, if you are, how you know what industry wants and how you respond to that.
I might go, and Carol and Alison and Michael can follow up. I think that's a big shift for us in the last maybe 10 years, in that we've got to a critical mass of information and data that can be used for multiple purposes. So we feel like we're providing value to a broad range of stakeholders, not just, say, the minerals industry, because we've got that national data sets that we can use to model and interpret for multiple uses. More recently, it has happened in the past, more recently, we've just been going through a very significant stakeholder engagement process, reaching out to the national peak bodies and individuals, contractors, the met sector, which are the suppliers of this data and really listening to what they want. We've also won 2 awards in recent times about how to present that data to people through, both of them are a portal, just happens to be a portal, but through user design. So it's something we're really focusing on now. But I think the other side of it is because we've got enough knowledge and data to really pivot to what they want. We also learn a lot about the challenges from our stakeholders. So it's not just about how can we find something quickly, it's also about regulations, land access, social license, and the problems they're having in individual areas. But anyone else?
Yep. Yeah, go Kroll, because I think I know what you're going to say. So Marina's right. So yeah, a lot of stakeholder engagement to understand what industry is looking for, but balanced with that is we appreciate that we also have a role in innovative and new thinking. So sometimes it's about thinking about what does industry need that they don't know that they need yet, and what can we do to keep Australia at that cutting edge. So yeah, bit of balance with that as well.
Nelia, any follow-up on that? All right, Richard Smith.
Okay, so the USGS calls themselves a science organization, and it's primarily driven by research scientists. So when they're doing some geophysical data acquisition, one of those research scientists gets allocated the responsibility for supervising the data acquisition, quality control. And then there's a procedure in place where, to some extent, that data can remain in the realm of that research scientist until such point as the research scientist has taken what they want from the data, and then it could be released to the public. So it's a sort of we keep the data until we've extracted what we want to achieve our research goals. So I just wanted to ask if that's something that sounds familiar to Geoscience Australia, or does the role of data acquisition, quality control, and that type of thing take on a different structure at Geoscience Australia?
You want to take a Marine, or should I?
No, you go and I'll see what I can add.
Yeah, sure. So, Richard, that's the situation where we were over a decade ago, I would say. About a decade ago, we moved very strongly to collect data, make sure it's quality, so we don't release subpar data, and get it out there for other people to use. That could also be researchers. So in a sense, that fills a whole lot of research scientists with dread. But to be fair, we've got many more ideas than many more things to do than any one piece of data set that we released is going to jeopardize us. So even really big, expensive things like deep reflection seismic profiles, they're huge investments. Big kudos to be the person to first publish on those sorts of things. We still get those out the door before an interpretation goes out, because the idea is we're here to serve, our view is there to serve the Australian public and to stimulate the desired end results. So we would, as we release it, we're working on the various value add products and the interpretations and new scientific insights, and they then go out. It has been a very big shift for us over the last decade. I'd say that 90% of our stuff now kind of works that way. There are maybe still some pockets here and there, but they're minor, I would say. Yeah, that's how we approach it.
So just to follow up on that, let's say, for example, the magnetic and gamma ray spectrometry data acquisition, would the person that's doing the QC for that have a PhD?
No, but they have training.
Mm-hmm.
Normally the person who, at we have like a management area and a science area, and the person in the lead of those particular areas would have a PhD. But they're not
not all.
Yeah, there's exceptions. I mean, somebody who's been doing it for 30 years is easily as qualified as someone who's got a 3-year PhD. So, you know, it's about recognising the individual skills rather than pieces of paper.
They do get trained. There is an element of in-house training for all those expert skills and where we can. Yeah.
Richard, any further follow-ups?
No.
David.
I did want to say just very quickly that there's been a real culture shift in Australia for that information to be open and transparent and available quickly. I've been working with Jonathan Stock at NASA, and when I go there and we talk similarly here about what could we do, the audience is very reluctant and can't believe that the data comes out pretty quickly and everybody gets the same data, and what about their competitive advantage? It's a real shift in mindset, and I think a lot of the companies see that the benefit of it rather than the loss. That's thanks.
Michael, I'll follow up on this specific point.
Yeah, we used to release data, as we've sort of said, we used to release data under license, and it often put strong restrictions on what you could do with it. There was a clause that said you couldn't use it for commercial purposes, and a person from BHP essentially wrote to GA and said, well, who's going to use this data if they can't use it for commercial purposes? And that sort of initiated the culture change of, yeah, what are we doing this for? And it's been a slow progression, like to get it to that point, but that was the big question. The data we produce only really has, in most cases, a valid commercial use. So why not release it for that purpose for free?
Okay, David, I think you're next, perhaps with a new line of questioning.
My question is also about data. Geoscience Australia, the data portal has huge amount of data, collected from tremendous industry proprietary data at the federal level and state level, and it is managed in so good way that all integrated 2D, 3D geophysics data, geochemistry, remote sensing imagery, all in a single user-friendly interface. And how did you manage that? And recently, USGS has an initiative called Earth MRI that they are receiving a huge amount of data. And what's your suggestion of, they are facing challenges of managing large amount of data. So what's your suggestion of managing such large amount of data in a user-friendly way for the public? And also, like, did you outsource the external vendors, or how long did it take to build this platform?
So we have built a platform. Some of it is open source and some of it is proprietary. I think Michael probably has the information about the balance there, but really standards, agreed standards, and adequate and beyond adequate metadata are two real key issues. And then that sort of gets sucked into the portal. But there is a growing need for us to provide data in more accessible formats for low entry. So we're starting to think about not just big data sets, but showing people georeferenced JPEG, for example, so they can buy into it. They might not use it as a georeferenced JPEG, but they might go, oh yeah, there's something in my area that is useful, and I'll employ a contractor to do more work. But for our largely the very large data sets, which are largely geophysics, but applies to everything that of strong workflow, data standards, metadata, and a semi-automated workflow are the key. And then there's the portal development. But
so to follow on from Marina, and it probably doesn't get enough credit internally on this culture change that happened about 10 years ago, where we decided it was called Science First at the time. And the idea was to basically invert what was going on in the relationship between our IT section and our science section, where it was a bit of, you know, the cart leading the horse kind of situation, where what you were able to do was dictated by what the people who were in the developers and the IT section said, well, we can't do that. And it became, instead of that, kind of like, what can't we do is what can we enable? And that was a culture change initiated by our CIO. His name's Anthony Stinziani at the time. He's since moved on, which really changed the way we did things. We embraced the cloud pretty heavily. We just decided everything we need to do needs to be on the cloud, so we were less restricted from you know, provisioning on-premises hardware. So that was a really big boon for us as well. And essentially just making sure, and we're still going through that process, there still needs to be more work done in this space to making sure the scientists and the science is put first. It's not restricted by what is possible via IT, is to keep doing that. And we've also got another sort of program going on for transformational change, which will do the same thing. But I think it's a cultural change as opposed to anything in particular. You know, making sure that you're sort of focused on process improvements, automating what you can, getting the right skills in. I think we still need to do that work. I think we're very self-critical as well. So it's great to hear feedback on how great the portal is, but internally we're like, man, wouldn't it be great if the portal was better? So we're very self-critical for our own systems. There's that term of dog fooding, so eat your own dog food, where you use the tools that you give to the public. You don't have specific internal tools that are special for you. You use the same tools that the public are using. So all of those kinds of things I think are important. But it has been probably 10, 15-year process of getting to that stage, and we're still looking to improve and get better.
So if I can just add
David,
to that
any?
point.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that I second all that. I think what was also important is that we've got a dedicated team of developers, and there's a recognition that that is it's a useful and important skill. We invest in certain developments equally in the science of it. Like an example of this would be, we've come up with a tool called Economic Fairways, where you can calculate the net present day value of a deposit anywhere across Australia. And that required a lot of economic development, technical development in terms of how do you get the data sets and working, how do you benchmark all that, you know, it's published and so on. But there's an equal amount of investment that has been put into that tool to make that hum along on the portal, to make it efficient and adopting industry best practice. So there's, I think, that culture point that, you know, people with different expertise have equal bits to contribute is really important. I would also say, you know, what we've also maintained large investments in databases and the requirements. So that's, you know, one thing when you said, you know, what do we do better in the critical minerals mapping initiative? At the moment, we're the people serving the critical minerals in ores data set, which is maybe the flagship product of that, to look at associations of various critical minerals in various ores on that. And I think it's because we've gotten our processes established where we can stand up these types of services quickly across areas. And, you know, when we started the journey on, say, 3D stuff, we were leveraging NASA's Whirlwind. That's where we started, actually. And then later on, we had this developer team, which is able to not be confined by what's possible in the current technology, but we use as much as we can. That's off the shelf. Yeah, and we generally tied, not always, but a lot of the time in the minerals area in particular, we're part of the open source movement. So we try and make the things that we develop, the code bases and so on, to be publicly available. So we leverage of what, you know, the USGS kind of develops, and they do likewise. You know, the recent inversions of Airborne AEM, they've been leveraging the various developments on those code bases here, and likewise there are opposite flows. So yeah.
Michael, a follow up on this point.
Yeah, so just to answer Richard's question in the chat, how many developers in IT groups? So the IT groups somewhat disseminated through the agency. There is a corporate IT group, but there is also embedded IT groups within our minerals and energy and groundwater division, which is co-located to give that kind of on-hand expertise and development advice or development skills. But I would say probably no more than 30 by raw head count for what we have. And that's 30 distributed across a number of different platforms. So not just the ones that you see. To go to Carol's point on open source, yeah, we try to use open source tools where we can, and collaborate with the open source community for the platforms that we need. So we both create our own tools, get off the shelf what we can, but we also contribute back to some of these open source communities where we can add add to their code base or add advice or influence the direction of some of these tools that we use in the open source community.
Okay, I think Karen, you were next.
Hi, everyone. This is really excellent. I think enviable situation you all have there. I know you collaborate with, say, Amira on the industry side, state geological surveys on this big state side. You have enormous states, and CSIRO and other national government organizations. So my question, I think, leads to how do you collaborate across these groups? Who's driving the change, the big cultural mindset change of 10 years ago? Like, who drove that? Was that a national government initiative? And if the government changes, is there a change in your orientation or in your funding or in your personnel and workforce? How cyclical, what is the instability there that we see maybe on this side? Or is it fairly predictive and out there for the long term? Does that make sense? Who's driving it, and how susceptible do you feel to change?
Yeah, I might start, but Carol sort of mentioned this a bit earlier. There was an initiative, the Uncover initiative. Now, there were things that were driving that, and that was firstly the requirement to stay relevant, I guess, was a big thing, but also to accelerate exploration and discovery. When there was a term, somebody would walk over a piece of ground looking for gold, and then 20 years later they'd find the biggest zinc mine in the world, for example. So we wanted to reduce that time and everything like that. The Uncover initiative was a body of work that brought all those people together to see what the high level drivers would be. And because they self-determined that, it was largely led by people at GA and probably the Science Academy, but I'm going to say GA was the energy in it to make this huge change. But Carol?
Yeah, so I think I think that's where it came from. I think there's been a big focus on culture at Geoscience Australia from the CEO perspective recently, in terms of facilitating kind of one GA and so on. But I'd say in the minerals area, it was Marina, her predecessor, that kind of got this delivering of the data sets out, and that was a really big change. Yeah, so I think individual leaders coming through with clarity of purpose, with a very clear view of what it is that we're intended to do. The Geoscience Australia strategic plan states specifically that we will discover a new frontier mineral province worth $100 billion or something like that, I can't remember, within the next 10 years. That was released in 2018. The aim is to do it by 2028. We've well surpassed that. We can tell you now, in terms of keeping a record of these things. But it does provide a very clear direction from the top, and that we then report in various parts of the organisation as part of that. And then that also becomes the various things that people focus on in terms of careers. What are you doing to support that goal versus necessarily, say, citations? but obviously things need to be quality.
Marina.
I'm sorry, I just want to follow up on that. Is Geoscience Australia therefore more independent from the government and the whims of the government, or waiting for direction from the federal government as much as perhaps the USGS is, or are you fairly more independent and able to have a long-term vision?
So I'll just jump in here and firstly, I'm putting things in the chat. So the Uncover Roadmap link is in the chat. I don't think we are independent from the government at all. We've been on these short-term finance program funding for a long time. But I think what we've done is we've worked out the way to get there here. So instead of just waiting for it all to come down, we've developed through hard work a circular conversation. So we feed things up. They tell us a little bit about not now, or more petroleum, less petroleum, and then we revisit some of these things. I think the roadmap was so big that it was permissive of many things. So having that really strong vision, I think really helped change the way we interact with government in Australia. We also have bipartisan support, so both sides of government support the work we do for different reasons. Carol, do you want to add?
I think you covered it. Yeah. So, but you know, we provide advice and demonstrate value, and now we've got 35 years of funding. So it has a very strong focus on resources for net zero. But I think because we're so engaged with that, you know, we can run various things past the parent department and the minister's office.
Yeah, and I don't know what the US situation is, but our senior leadership has regular meetings with our minister's office, and so they're able to influence up as well as it coming down to us. Plus a strong communications team that are always on the lookout for stories that will capture the public interest, and bringing our minister in to announce something or push something out. I mean, if we're like making the minister look good, then they're, you know, open to hearing what we have to say, and that also helps that influence up.
I might just add that we've made it sound really easy. It's not. We still have really strong, firm government regulations, procurement rules that make our job so much harder than it could be. But it's important to do that. So I just don't want you thinking, oh, they've got it easy, they must be whatever. No, it is really difficult.
Yeah, and sure, we are influencing up, but we are also subject to the, you know, the government's priorities of the day, to have to be very responsive to that.
Doug, I think you're next in line.
Yes, and I've got a very different kind of question. Skill sets, and skilled personnel, and both attracting them and retaining them is a big topic. And how do you retain folks or attract folks when you've got an industry sector that's also looking for the same skill sets? I mean, there's a lot of avenues in that question, but I'm just curious how you address that and maintain and advance your progress in the sector.
I might start, but I do invite comments from others. It's the work we do and the perceived security of your position. So these jobs really attract people who want to be world leaders, who want to do amazing science, who have bought into resource exploration, and then they get to work on these national scale data sets and come up with new products and maps and things. I think that's something that brings people in and something that keeps people there. We get to do the most amazing work, even if it's exactly what we want. So it's not deep research. There's such a variety of work. Where it's not good is we don't pay anywhere near industry rates, and at times it's at half or a third. and we don't have any control over that. And also, again, working for government, you have your great work, and then you've got the government work alongside. So it's something really that we've been trying to manage to make people's jobs, excuse me, better. Another problem we have is, for want of a better word, a cap on numbers. So we don't have unlimited budget. So we have fewer people, and all these people, most of these people are highly motivated and will extend whatever work we have. And so then we have a lot of overworked people with burnout, but they stay. And I have to think that's because they're working with world leaders. They've got amazing people like Michael and Carol and Alison to work with and for. And the vision is so, it's that hearts and minds, especially now with the transition to clean energy, people really feel motivated. But I think in the past, it's also been we've attracted people because of the type of work it is. And it is an easier environment than academia or some of the other government organisations to get that kind of thrill from the work that we do. But I am a boss, and I'm removed from the day-to-day. So anybody else?
Yeah, so I think for many people, we are part of the public service, and so there is that vocation aspect as well. We're never going to earn the big bickies like you do in industry, but we're not here because we want to earn big bickies. We're here because we want to give back to the public, that service mindset. And as Maria said, we get to do the coolest work in the public service. So, you've got a lot of people here who just absolutely adore the type of work we do. We live in Canberra, which is a beautiful city, one of Australia's best kept secrets. And we just work with terrific people. So why would you go anywhere else, even if it is more money? We've got everything we need here in Canberra. When people realise that, then we do attract the type of people that we want, that want to work for us. And so we do get a good group of people here.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-on again in a different topic, Rod? It's a quick one.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. It goes to the company reporting in Australia. And so mindful of the legal framework and the liability of misreporting in Australia, which is different than the US. Do you find higher fidelity of data disclosure in Australia than you might find in other jurisdictions? I'm thinking about what the companies report that then becomes public domain because of what they're doing in their exploration development activities or such.
I'm not sure how to answer that because I've never really studied what companies are reporting outside of Australia in any great detail. You're right, we do have strict rules around it. So, for example, our mining companies, when they're reporting their exploration results and mineral resource estimates, they must report using the JORC code, which is a CRISCO-aligned code. And that's actually part of the listing rules of the Australian Securities Exchange. So that's a point of difference to other countries where they have reporting codes, but they're not actually part of the listing rules. And if you're if you break the listing rules, there's all kinds, you're in all kinds of trouble that you can get into. So I'd say in that sense, we've got the framework for very good public disclosure for a wide variety of information. How well that is done and how well that's policed is another subject. And so there's a little bit of an out, I think of it as a little bit of an out clause in the sense that the JORC code only requires companies to report what is material to the business. And so a big company like Rio Tinto, for example, because it's such a huge company, it doesn't have to get down into the nitty-gritty about particular commodities or individual deposits, because in the scheme of things, it's it's just comes out in the wash. But for a small company, an individual deposit or a particular commodity is absolutely material to the company, and so they need to report on it. So you do get different levels of reporting depending on the company size and what it regards as material. And then whether the Australian Securities Exchange, ASX, whether that then follows up and chases down these things, polices these things, that's also another little issue that I sometimes get a bit concerned about, that they don't do as good a job as they could. But that may be a resourcing issue on their part, or not being alerted to the fact that a company has reported something a bit strangely.
No,
So it's not perfect, but the frameworks are there for good disclosure.
no, that's helpful. Thank you very much.
All right, I think we have 5 additional hands raised, and I think I have the order correctly. Just a time check, I note that we are 1 hour and 8 minutes into our time slot, and I think, and I'm speaking now to the committee, we need to keep that in mind, keep the time constraint in mind as we think about additional questions. Nelia, you're next on my list. My list is Nelia, Cecilia, Steve, Richard, and David.
Early in the call, there was a mention about excellent collaboration between Geoscience Australia and academia. And we haven't really explored that yet. I'm really curious to hear how that works, what your model is, how the funding works. There was something in the chat about internships. I didn't actually read that because I have a hard time reading and listening at the same time. So if I could just get an overview of that, that would be great.
I'll start, but I think Carl's probably best to answer it. In the chat, I basically say we do very limited internships, grad programs compared to, say, our defence area. And I've just got an example there. Well, no, I might leave it to Kroll. The agreements that we've had in place for the last 4 or 5 years have worked much better than previously. Over to you, Kroll.
Yeah, so at the moment, our agreements are the collaborative agreements, but they're still with outputs in mind. So a lot of the time we approach academia with certain set questions and problems and directions that we want to be able to answer, and we know that we do not have the capability to do it in-house. So we generally have a view that if something goes well, there's enough glory to share for everybody. So collaborations are free and open. We have a range of different ways to be able to collaborate with academia. We have these one-on-ones, which are targeted on something that we're trying to do. We do have things where sometimes we come in with I suppose a consortium of other geological surveys and leverage research funding through the equivalent of what's the big funding body in the US? It's left my mind. In Australia, it's called the Australian Research Council, but I can't remember what it's called.
NSF?
NSF, that's it. Yeah. So it's kind of, you can have these collaborations. And the third type, really large collaborative projects, are largely through cooperative research centres. So these are outside of the funding scheme of the equivalent of an NSF. They're very focused on industry transformation, but they have it's a partnership between ourselves, a former research science organisation, the academia and industry, and government matches what industry provides into that on a one-to-one. And through those, we do various bits of geoscience research, but also pull through technology. An example of that would be, say, the coiled tubing rig that has been recently developed through the MINEX CRC, it's called. And it's also super valuable because through those things with academia and industry, we're able to, I suppose, target more acute problems of industry, I suppose. Does that make sense?
I have a quick follow-up on your one-on-one collaboration model. The funding for that, would that be flowing from GA to academia? Would the 2 people collaborate or group collaborate and go out and get external funding someplace else? What's the typical model there?
The typical model is that we would be funding it. Sometimes the universities provide some in kind, normally of staff time or equipment time. But it can be all the way from fundamental physics of high pressure temperature experiments on various minerals, all the way through to, interpretations of economic modeling and so on. We have a whole range of different types of projects that we do under that type of remit. And the aim here is that all that dovetails in and builds up into projects like the mineral potential maps of Australia and so on. So there's a pathway that we can see how this is going to, I suppose, result in the final impact, even though it might be many, many years down the track.
Nelia, anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay, Cecilia.
Hi, I have two questions. One is regarding mine waste. The USGS has recognized that mine waste is a source of critical minerals, and they have now a program to identify mine waste and develop a mine waste inventory. I wanted to know whether you guys have a similar thing in Australia and how you are approaching it. Are you approaching it on your own, or are you partnering with industry to identify these resources, and do you have a plan on how you're going to develop them? And my second question is regarding First Nations and Aboriginal knowledge. I know that Australia is very good at being very inclusive and take advantage of the knowledge that First Nations have. How do you include these people in the work, and if any, that you do at Geoscience Australia? Thank you.
Well, I'll answer the first question about mine waste and then throw to Carol to talk about First Nations and Marina as well, if she wants to say something as well. So yes, we have a mine waste, national mine waste assessment project here at Geoscience Australia. It began under our previous program called Exploring for the Future. And we recognise that mine waste is a potential source of critical minerals and other minerals. Plus it has opportunities for potentially improving our environmental legacy if we can understand better the resource potential and potential for reprocessing that. Now, we're not a large organisation, and there is a lot of mine waste in Australia. We put out, one of the first things we did was, it's such a basic, simple thing, but nobody had ever put lats and longs on our mine waste locations. And so we put out something that at the time was called the Atlas of Australian Mine Waste. And it so far it's got over 1,400 sites of tailings dams, major rock dumps, smelter residue, that kind of thing. To do that, though, because we're not a large organisation, collaboration with others was absolutely key. And so we had a number of collaborations with universities, probably the largest one was with the University of Queensland's MyWatch team at the Sustainable Minerals Institute. We also had other collaborations with RMIT University in Victoria. And utilising their skill and expertise, we were able to publish the Atlas, which is an interactive digital platform, and also start the sampling program, which is about characterising the mine waste across the country, trying to use a mineral systems approach, so that if we can understand the different types of mineral systems and ore bodies, and how they were mined at the time, what kind of processing they underwent, we can start then to model what we expect reported to concentrate and what might have reported to the tailings. And then that way you can build up a map of secondary prospectivity for our mine waste. So that's the type of work we've been doing. And then we had a third collaboration with Monash University, which was about understanding some of the basic information you need to get an economic, to understand more about the economic viability of mine waste, because it's all very well saying, well, we think cobalt we think cobalt from this copper mine has reported to the tailings, but you need to understand the volumes in the tailings as well. And there's different ways you can do that. You can look at production data and try to figure out what you think your volume of tailings is that way. But what we engaged Monash University to do was to use satellite data through time. Can we estimate it remotely? So different ideas are underway in that program. Under our new program, Resourcing Australia's Prosperity, we plan to continue that work. There's still a lot to do in that mineral system space, that modelling, that secondary prospectivity. And we're also interested in understanding the carbon capture potential of tailings, whether that's something that could be utilised. I'm probably forgetting things, but yeah, it is quite a high profile project for us, and something that we are keen to collaborate with others around the world, because there's a lot of mineral systems out there that we could learn from other people's mineral systems and apply that information to our own.
I'll jump in and then go to Carol with the First Nations work. It's very important. I think I was the first person who employed an anthropologist to go out and do some work before we undertook pre-competitive data acquisition, probably in about 2010. We have a very strong team, a land access and engagement team that are highly skilled in working with First Nations people and largely helping us get access to land and doing outreach and education. Where there's a big pivot now in RAP, and I'll hand over to Carol, is that we'll be doing work with the First Nations people rather than sort of go and do and deliver. There's a big shift. So, Carol?
Yeah, thanks, Marina. So over the last 4 years, we've kind of started to learn how to work with First Nations people, where we've done co-design projects, asking, well, we've got this capability and this information. What is that you need? In the coming programs, we want to, I suppose, maximise the opportunities across Australia for things like critical minerals and other resources. And a lot of that sits on places where First Nations people have either a very important say, almost, and in places exclusive say from that. So the idea is to undertake collaborative co-design projects, still looking at resource potential, but to put them in a position in an informed position to negotiate economic and environmental, I suppose, benefits for their areas. And we're on a journey on that. It's going to take us quite some time. But again, I think it's part of that cultural component across Geoscience Australia in terms of overall where we're moving. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
Cecilia, any follow-up?
Thank you. That was great.
All right, Steve.
Yeah, thanks. I really applaud your guys' emphasis on getting data out to industry and your focus there. It seems very diligent, I guess, in a way. But my question is in a totally different vein, if you excuse the pun. Here in the United States, there are a lot of government agencies that have a finger in the critical minerals world, and coordinating that across government agencies to make sure there aren't overlaps, duplicity, gaps in coverage of who's doing what, where, and why. And I'm just wondering what the situation is in Australia, whether there are agencies other than your own who are working in the mineral sphere. And if that is the case, how do you manage to ensure that there isn't duplication or competition or overlap? Because it's obviously a potential issue.
Well, we can all have a go, I suppose, answering.
You go first.
I mean, it's all good. So there are other places working on it. There was a question in the chat about what about CSIRO, the Commonwealth Research Organisation. There's also Australia's Nuclear Technology Organisation. There's things happening on the policy side, the Critical Minerals Office. We have regular meetings with all of these bodies. And importantly, we've got a thing which is called the Critical Minerals Research and Development Hub, which is a great avenue of sharing information, and it acknowledges the strengths that we have across these different areas. So what we're trying to do is promote discovery, but development also. So we're trying to go provide information which goes further down the supply chain. If we, an example would be we're doing a project at the moment of high purity silica, for high purity quartz for silicon production, which US is the world's largest component there. And this is where we do the geology, and so does provides a whole bunch of information about the processing, looking at flow sheets for Australia's types of ore deposits, and we can work together on the economics of those kind of components. So I suppose in short, it requires people to interact and talk, and that's what we do. Marina's excellent in coordinating all these sorts of things. So yeah. That's how we do it. Sometimes, there's people are doing all sorts of things, but we're also fairly well tuned into to academia, and as Marina already alluded to, as we're planning the Resourcing Australia's Prosperity program, we've been doing a month of consultations, 2 or 3 hour meetings across different sectors. This is across Commonwealth organisations, universities, which is happening actually today, industry, which has happened last week, and so on, so that we kind of get a perspective of what's happening across the whole area.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. It's a mixture of formal engagement. So there are regular meetings between Geoscience Australia's leadership and organisations like the CSIRO to make sure that our research is collaborative and aligned, and we're not duplicating. And then there's also a whole range of meetings that are more at the official level, the officer level, sorry, and can be more spontaneous. So this afternoon, for example, I'll be in a meeting with CSIRO's circular economy people, because they heard that we're doing the mine waste work and they want to understand more about that, and so we'll have those kind of organic, spontaneous type discussions as well that keep us all informed. It's the advantage of not being a huge country. The research pool is a little bit smaller, and eventually we all know each other, so that's an advantage that keeps us from duplication. And with our state governments, we've constantly in contact with them to make sure that what we're doing at the federal level is aligned with what they're doing at the state level, and vice versa. Yeah.
Any follow-up, Steve?
Nope, I'm
Richard.
good. Thanks, Rod.
Richard.
Yes. So we heard a little bit from Marina about stakeholder engagement and people phoning up companies that had just staked tenements, for example, and wandering around conferences, questioning people. But I also wondered if there were other types of engagement. So, for example, do you invite industry to come to some specific GA forums or things like that? Are there meetings that the GA organizes to reach out to people?
I'll start and other people can join in. So COVID happened and it made a lot of those things a little bit more difficult, but in a way it made it easier because now we're not traveling around the country as much. So what works really well for us and what we'll be doing more of are workshops alongside other conferences. So rather than the burden of all being all the organising and all that sort of stuff, we'll an ACG conference or the International Geochemistry Conference will organise a workshop alongside that. That's where a lot of our industry people go to. AusIMM in Australia, that's a big peak body or big professional society that Kroll and Alison did a lot of work at just recently in August. We had a very large, very successful Exploring for the Future program showcase. So that was something everybody could log into and watch talks and ask questions. There was a lot of interaction there. That just happened recently. So it's something we try to do in multiple platforms fairly regularly, but I think that's something that we can do more of with opening up of travel. We also have travel restrictions as a part of the government, but it would be great to hold some more, although I think Patrice held a GA workshops along, there was an alongside workshop. So it's horses for courses. Over to Carol.
Oh, I'll just
Thank
jump
you.
up. Okay, Carl.
Oh, yeah. Australia Minerals.
No, you go,
Alison.
Alison. I think you've got more important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just going to say, we also get, two things. We also have people visiting us here at Geoscience Australia, which is always lovely. So sometimes we'll get individual companies will come in and have a chat. They want to tell us about their recent find and see what we think about it. And it's great for us because we get that minerals intelligence, straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And sometimes we get peak bodies, industry representative groups come through. They might be bringing a delegation to Canberra, and they'll stop in at GA and tell us what they're trying to do, and that's also very useful, an engagement tool in that sense. The Australian Minerals work that we do, that's about promoting investment into Australia, and this is it's a brand name that we use for the work that Geoscience Australia does in collaboration with the state geological surveys. So it's an international facing brand. And so when we do our overseas work, such as going to PDAC, for instance, we're not there as individual states and federal, we're there as Australian Minerals, because overseas people don't care if you're from New South Wales or Victoria or Queensland, you're just Australian. And so that's a way that we sort of leverage off each other's strengths and represent that united front. If you invest in Australia, the entire country welcomes you, that kind of messaging. So we have that sort of engagement as well. And I'll hand over to Carol now.
Yeah. So I think most of the elements have been covered really well. I'd say that a while back, maybe we didn't used to have mineral specific I suppose, showcases of what we've done. But over the last 3 years, we've built that up, and now there's a growing, I suppose, brand recognition and interest in terms of what we deliver itself, and it provides a focal point to be able to show the breadth of the sort of things that we do to the public. And like the USGS, in terms of engagement with scientists, to be able to pull the best information about the geology of a particular region or things like that. We have workshops on those, and I know the USGS has similar types of I suppose, engagements to be able to harness information and the best understanding of certain regions. And we're starting to, yeah.
No, go on. Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, we're starting to, I suppose, where we can record some of these sorts of things so that if people can't make it. We've got a workshop. The training material is then available online, and you can come up with, launch your own virtual machine and learn how to do a certain piece of inversion or what have you. Yeah, those stuff.
Yeah, and on the lighter side, the comms team are very active on social media, so promoting everything that we've been doing and how to get in contact with us and how to find out more about the data. So that's helpful as well.
I might interject here and just ask Jonathan or Morgan, will we be capturing the information in the chat, including the web links?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, okay. Just wanted to make sure that we didn't have to be furiously clicking on them and copying those down. I thought that was the case. David.
Yeah, thank you. So my question has some level overlap with Richard's question. So given all the great things you've done, can you elaborate, like, how does GA advertise itself? At the national level, do you see effective ways of bring the public awareness and support of, all the resources you offer? And if you have any lessons or suggestions that you would like to share with USGS. Thank you.
So it's hard. I think like LinkedIn is certainly a great thing. Social media, getting things out there is very useful. What we're learning from feedback from industry when we talk to them is they really want more workshops and more translation of the information. While the use of our information is high across industry, I would say that there is a lot that industry doesn't know about what we provide. And there is also a component where many would say, oh my goodness, the level in industry is across many areas is they can't appropriate a number of the new things that are coming on, and you need to give them a leg up. And that's why we've been doing more and more of these workshops to try and translate what we provide. It's the hands-on experience and the discussion with people that is super useful. So when we have travel restrictions, that does result in an impact in terms of in decreasing the impact of what we provide, because nuances in science are really important in terms of what is provided. So yeah, maybe that's a way to answer that one. Marina, I think you probably have a lot more to say.
No.
Okay.
I think I'm looking at the time mainly and still hands, but yeah, I think you covered it.
Okay, well, maybe we come back to that if we have extra time that we don't know what to do with. Richard.
Yeah, so I think you've done a good job of explaining your short-term funding, and the USGS certainly have a similar problem. They've got a lot of funding just recently through their bilateral or bipartisan infrastructure funding, but they need to be able to sell their usefulness to the legislators in the Congress. So we're struggling with coming up with ways of measuring what the return on investment is or the impact. So do you have some very specific sort of examples that you could share with us?
I think I'll start. I think I've got a couple of things in the chat where the return on investment was probably a bit of a, I'll say game changer, but it was something new that got their attention. But Coral's been through this much more recently.
Yeah, so I think there's a few things. I think you need case studies. Case studies speak to USGS did this, industry did that resulted in this. And while environmental gains and so on are great, finance speaks a lot. It's just an easy number. That's what we found. Like we've also got groundwater case studies and all that sort of thing, but there's just such huge value in the resources. So we'll place some more very focused things. So Marina kind of started a number of return on investment studies where you kind of say, this is how much we spent, this is what happened, and this is what the net present day value of the return is from all of that investment, and looking at the counterfactual, what would have happened if we hadn't done the study, for example. So an early one of these was, initially we had hypothetical things in terms of it's likely that this region that GA's identified is going to have this type of size deposit. We were able to run it through our economic fairways, which the consultants were going, oh, why don't you guys do it yourself? Well, we need independent people to be able to say it. But what's more useful, it speaks louder, I think, is when things have either been discovered or embedded that gone into production. So, so going through that. Unfortunately, case studies in themselves don't provide the macro view in terms of what the whole economy is doing. So if you can then roll that up and say, okay, these are a few case studies, and now overall, this is the use of our information, and then roll it up in terms of how much percent of GDP is dependent on this type of work, then that was a really big change for us. And that was really based on what is the percentage of industry that are using our information, and therefore, and what is the downstream value that they generate from that, and that's how we were able to get to those numbers. I'll paste an example of a case study, and I'll put an example of that kind of macro level view, and we've done those in a number of different, I suppose, scenarios. Just give you probably the two highlights at the moment. yeah, but there's a few of these sorts of things around. Oh yeah, and activity. If you're constantly monitoring and you're able to provide a narrative of how that's changing and how things are kind of growing, I think that also results in, I suppose, trust that you're not overselling, but things are kind of growing, and you've got to be careful that you are actually the type of stories that are being told. And I think scientists are also often very cautious in being able to tell these types of stories. I think you need to put yourself out there, yeah.
Thanks.
All right.
I might add to that. I think upskilling the people in the other department is really important as well. So that easy language, the economic slant, but hoping that you maybe even embed one of your people over there, so it's always becomes a natural thing. I think we spent a lot of time upskilling people in our department to understand and then go into bat for us. So it wasn't just us, so it was them as well. But rocks are very political at the moment, so it might not be as hard as it's been in the past.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Marina. We do all this, as well as our industry engagement, where and try to be persuasive across government as well. We're not just focusing on what we can do for industry, but creating persuasive arguments on what value we provide to government itself, and that's across agencies that have interest in minerals or critical minerals. So doing that level of stakeholder engagement is also very important.
Okay, I have two questions, and mindful of the time. Let me ask both of the questions, and then ask for responses. The first question is narrow and directed, I think, principally at Allison, and that it's comparing your group with NMIC, the National Minerals Information Center. You talked a little bit about that before. And you talked about domestic versus global, the breadth of the scope and the size of the capability, and that I appreciate that. My question has to do with integration. NMIC, by and large, is a unit that was once in the U.S. Bureau of Mines and had kind of a set of activities that it undertook there that was just picked up and moved to the USGS. And ever since, it's operated not entirely, but largely independent from the science activities within the USGS. Now, there are instances of one affecting the other, the scientists influencing NMIC influencing the sciences, but neither side would agree that they are integrated to a large degree. To what extent are your activities in GA between the I'm just going to call them the economists. I realize they're not all economists. They're probably not economists, but the people who are studying reserves, resources, resource assessment, production, consumption, and so on. To what degree do they interface significantly with the scientists?
So yeah, thanks for that, Ron. And
could I just? I want to plant the seed for my second question before you start to answer, because that's to everyone and it's open-ended, and that is the question to all of our Geoscience Australia colleagues and guests. As we wrap up this meeting, what would you like to tell us that we haven't directly asked about, but you think we should know, given what else we've revealed that we're interested in? So that's kind of lurking in the background. But now, Allison, the NMIC.
Well, I'm so glad you asked both of those questions, because they actually kind of pair together with what I'd like you guys to know. Because the very first question that you asked us was, what does GA do better than the USGS? And I'd like to flip that as well, because there are some things that USGS does better than GA, and I think you need to know about that as well. So when it comes to the National Minerals Information Centre, yeah, I'm incredibly jealous of the size of the group, and so I said at the start that, you know, maybe we're a little more efficient because we're such a small group and we have to cover the entire country, and we're a mining nation, so that's a big job. But I'm jealous because they've got more people, and so they've got more depth. And yes, sure, they're covering the globe as well as domestic, but they've got time to really get to know their subject, to really get to become experts in their commodities, and they've got that that ability then to go down different research paths and understand the entire global supply chain in a much more holistic and in-depth way than we will ever do here in GA. We just don't have the people, and we're just too stretched across a whole lot of different subjects to be able to do that really in-depth expert type work. So that's something that the National Minerals Information Centre just leads the world on. They're just so amazing at it. And so they're the one part of the USGS that I wouldn't change. They're just amazing. So I'm aware that they do tend to be a little bit separate because they do have that background, having come from the Bureau of Mines, which no longer exists. And I'm aware that sometimes they will talk to the other scientists at USGS, and sometimes they won't. And I think that's not just a function of that they're kind of a little bit separate, but it's also that mosaic structure that you have, that the USGS has with its management. And you've got so many different locations where the USGS is across the country, whereas at Geoscience Australia, we're all in Canberra, all in the one spot, all in the one building. We see each other for getting coffee every day. So there's a little bit of difference there. I think some of that integration for the USGS will happen as people retire and new blood comes in. And we're starting to see that happen already with the people who were originally in the Bureau of Mines. They're all retiring now. So you've got people who are USGS from the start coming into that group. In regards to integration here at Geoscience Australia, because we are a much smaller group, I don't have in my group all of the expertise that I need to cover all of the 36 plus commodities that we cover domestically. And so I am heavily reliant on the people in Marina's branch to provide me that expertise when I need to provide advice to government. And so because we have that, because I have that reliance on them, but equally they're utilising a lot of the work that we do in understanding the mineral resources and pulling that into their mineral systems modellings. And so we've got that knowledge going backwards and forwards between the two areas. And I mean, if GA ever got restructured, you could easily put my section in Marina's minerals branch, or parts of Marina's branch in with my area. So there's a lot more integration across the agency for us, simply because there has to be, because we just don't have that expertise, the numbers to have all of the expertise in one group. It has to be spread across the broader agency, and we have to utilise that way.
Very good, thank you. That's quite helpful. And you've answered both of my questions now, I think. Michael.
Yeah, I think this section did actually exist separate from GA about 20 years ago. So it was part of what was called the Bureau of Resource Science, I think it was. Is that the correct term? And then it got brought back into GA. It was once a function of the previous Bureau of Mineral Resources, but then got separated and then brought back in. And I think there's generally, we've had a number of attempts and successful ones mostly to talk about things like what we call 1GA, so what we used to call 1GA, and that's about not being siloed, to use that term, not to treat your business operation as something separate and distinct and special from the rest of the organization. So there's definitely, we're encouraged to collaborate across our branches and divisions and sections where that's possible. So there's a lot of activity in that space. People do like to talk to their friends down the hall, that kind of thing. That's one thing that we do. We generally encourage collaboration across hierarchies. So GA, I feel, is not as hierarchical as a lot of other government organisations. I have some experience in other ones, and there were strict hierarchies on what you could do and who you could communicate with. You had to go up and down the hierarchy to speak to someone, which sort of impedes really effective collaboration and ability to work together. And just to sort of reiterate Alison's point on what USGS does, it's great. You asked a question before, what could we tell you, on what's good to do? I kind of look at what USGS does for what I use it for, kind of like the grass is always greener, like envy, kind of like, oh, that's some of the things you do are just so simply laid out and, quite easy to discover. So I find like when I'm trying to do research on, production or resources of minerals, it's just so clear and well laid out, and I know where to go. It's brilliant. And that's something I think we should probably learn from you, is just some simpler interfaces, not trying to over-engineer everything to be, this kind of interoperable model, just easy to use. So
yeah. And that simple interface hasn't changed in years. It's just so familiar. It's great.
You dial it up and you've got muscle memory to know where to click, and it's
exactly.
Thank you, Michael. Carol.
Yeah, so I think that the question about integration between the two areas in terms of the science component and the resource kind of assessments. So we've been moving closer and closer to those two worlds and letting the priorities, say from criticality studies, inform the priorities for the science. And I think those are also areas that we've had quite a few chats with Nadal, and he was very generous with his time in terms of sharing expertise. So I think there's also components where some of these things can be done together, I think, from an international kind of perspective. So I see great opportunities for integration across that. And like others who say, what does the USGS do that's better? At the end of the day, we're a whole bunch of individuals, and we all have various bits of expertise, and we benefit so much from learning from the deep expertise in the USGS. It's such an honour to kind of work with people like Paul Emspo and Cathy and have links into other teams, which might not be part of the CMMI, to be like Paul Bedrosian and others like that, which you can kind of talk. So I think that there's, in terms of integration, I think there's the integration between our surveys is super important and valuable, because I think the USGS has got a bit out of interaction from us, and I think likewise for us. And there's some challenges which we're now starting to, I think, tackle in the earth sciences, where it's not that it's a benefit just to interact with each other, it's actually a requirement. Some of the mineral systems have global signatures, be able to, and I think those are the types of challenges that when we focus on them together, we've got the ability to kind of solve those the big questions. And say sedimentary mineral systems is one of those types of examples. Yeah.
Thank you, Carol. Marina, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I absolutely echo the collaboration, the lack of silos, making time for that to happen, even if you're in completely different parts of the country, more integrated, upskilling people so they're not necessarily complete, they can only do one thing, sharing that knowledge around. Something we haven't really spoken about a lot, but the real power that is emerging for us in the resources space is the politicization of rocks, of critical minerals, of energy and hubs and things like that. And I think growing, and you may already have this, I just don't know, but growing that outreach to see what is happening, and then bringing that back in and the vision to move forward and make these changes that you're doing is so impactful. There are countries that are probably trying to access information from you to gain real advantage, and not just in the mining, in world politics. And I think a lens of that on for your people to understand, but also to send that message back up that, you know, playing with markets, deciding what elements or metals are going to be costed or whatever, that's a huge thing for your sovereign capability, for your sovereign security. And that's just an element we haven't mentioned. It's probably in your forefront of mind, but a small team working in that space, because I think that's something GA, we get that through Australian Minerals, but we don't then sort of formalise it or act on the nuances that are happening at great speed. So I was in a meeting, a high-level meeting, where basically they're talking about World War III being this rush to produce resources, and all the games that are being played. When you understand that, you can flick a few levers to really make it work impactful without spilling the beans. And I'm not spilling the beans right now because we're being videoed, but I'm happy to discuss that with somebody later. But I think that's a huge power engine power that you've got for the US to drive big important things for the world.
Thank you, Marina. Karen, do you have a quick question?
I know, and I know, Rod, you're going to knock me on the head for asking a question so late, but I just wanted to check. You all have energy and minerals, and I suppose process development kind of together very quickly. And do people kind of work across those two spaces, whereas USGS has them quite separate? Thanks. Very quick. Bye.
Yeah, Karen, we do. In addition to that, we've got groundwater, and what we're seeing, it's been I suppose, a journey for us over the last 8 years or so, to share the expertise across that, and I think we're starting to see the real benefits of that, where you've got a data collection for predominantly an energy purpose, but actually the majority of the impacts in the end became for minerals, because people were able to articulate what is the significance for mineral systems as a result of that. Another example would be the ability to link what is the renewable energy opportunities, storage for hydrogen generation, how does that link in with mineral production and decarbonisation challenges, and being able to link those things formally from an economic opportunity, but also map it spatially across the country. So I think those are the type of examples that we're starting to see benefits by being able to have effectively a group which fundamentally looks at the geology that is on the surface and below the surface for the whole range of commodities that might be there.
Thank you very much, Carol. And aware of the time, let me suggest that we bring the proceedings to a close. Thank you very much, Michael and Carol and Karina and Allison, or Marina and Allison. This has been extraordinarily helpful for me, at least, and I'm sure for the rest of our group. And so thank you very much. And let me pass it back to where we began and pass the gavel back to Carol and Jonathan.
Well, I'll just echo what you've said. This has been incredibly helpful, and we are so thankful for your graciousness and your generosity in sharing the things you're doing and the ideas you have. Really appreciate it.
On behalf of Geoscience Australia, we're really grateful that you reached out to us. We really love working with the US in all matters, but that we could offer some advice and input in a safe environment. We're really, really grateful. I've also popped in the chat. Don't hesitate to email us if you've got more questions that you'd like more answers on. Some of these things we can, point you to something or send a quick email. We're happy to be here to help, and not just today, but next 20 or 30 years, or until I win the lottery.
That's really wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Jonathan or Morgan, any final words from you?
No, just to extend our thanks on behalf of the National Academies as well. Thanks for participating in this session, and we hope that this engagement has been useful for the committee as well as fun for all of you. And we, like I said, this meeting is going to be recorded and posted on a website, but we can send you connection information to that if you're interested also to view the recording of it. Otherwise, I would wish everyone a good evening, morning, afternoon, or whatever time of the day it is. And again, thank you to everyone.